no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway. Mr. Butcher goes by the title Long Shot on a lot of online locales. It's a reference to the statistic that only 3 in every 1,000 people who attempt to become published authors actually make it. Never tell this man the odds. We are now 15 books into the Harry Dresden series. 15th book, Skin Game, published last week. He's, of course, the author of the Codex Alera series.
This is going to take forever.
Upcoming Cinder Spires as well. Is he finished yet? Not by a long shot. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jim Butcher.
So I've got a song stuck in my head, which occasionally happens. Normally it's like just some inane thing, but at this point it's a bad modification of the theme song to Game of Thrones. The whole thing that way. You can actually find it online of people, and it's like a group of people singing it together with an action figure of Tyrion Lannister just spinning around. And once it's heard, it cannot be unheard. So now, anytime you watch Game of Thrones, you just watch because you'll find yourself singing because it just makes sense. Anyway. I'm still enraged over that whole, because I haven't read past the first book, so the series is new. No, I read the first book when I was like 19 and was just like, I don't like anybody, there's nobody to root for, it's not a series that I'm digging. And, but watching TV, it's different because there's boobs. and there's all these characters that I just love to watch, I wanted there to be a spin-off series. I wanted there to be a cop series of Tyrion and Bronn just running down his mountain. Because that would have been awesome. We totally could have done that. And I want Arya and the Hound to have their own series. Actually, I want it to be an anime series with like this giant hound, 15-foot tall hound, and the teeny 2-foot tall Arya. Because that would also make sense. But anyway. I guess we'll talk about stuff other than fandom at some point. It's hard for me to get my nerd on these days at times. What are we talking about?
Well, do you want to tell us a little bit about the Cinder Spires series? There's buzz about it, we don't have much hard information.
The Cinder Spires. The first book is called The Aeronaut's Windlass because there are words like aeronauts and windlass, so you know it's steampunk. The Cinder Spires is, I kind of don't want to call it steampunk, I kind of want to call it steam opera, but then I thought maybe I shouldn't try and invent my own genre and I'll just call it steampunk. But it's really somewhere between space opera and steampunk. It's Hornblower meets the X-Men. Only that doesn't sound very steampunk either, so I say it's Hornblower meets the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And because that's steampunk here. But anyway. It's a fantasy series. It's to a great degree. It's multiple viewpoint characters. The setting of the story is a little bit more like the Dresden Files because things kind of get compiled into one terrible weekend. So it's got a little bit more of the pace of the Dresden Files, but it's got the multiple viewpoint characters to mess around with. I would like to say that people are going to love it because it's got a kind of a nifty story world, or that they're going to enjoy the mythology of the world that gets set up, or the characters, or the plot, but really they're going to like it because it's got talking cats. They are the most horrible little monsters. They really are. They're terrible little tyrants. And yeah, they're maybe so cats. Yeah. you know, I would like to say that that's the, you know, all these other things are what's going to make the story cool, but it's the cats are going to steal the show. They're going to upstage everyone. You know they are. I love writing them because writing them is so much fun, and you know, and they're almost as good as they think they are, which just makes it worse. But anyway, but yes, we've got airships and pirate captains and a great deal of just general fun and dueling and manners and things like that. Anyway, the first book, it would have been done. It's a horrible, dental things happened to me. So I lost about 2.5 weeks of my April. I spent them on medically sanctioned opiates during that time. You know, I had my dentist going, "Are you sure you don't want more?" No, I'm good. I've been watching the Weather Channel for like 3 hours. And it's still interesting, so I think I've got enough done. But I'll be finishing it up and then starting the next Dresden Files book. So I know that will relieve my editor. So that'll be coming out probably sometime next year. Great.
Was there some kind of epic conflict that led to the writing of Cinder Spires, or did it just come out of different?
Well, it wasn't really an epic conflict. It was just more along the lines of overhearing a conversation at a convention where somebody was saying, "Oh, well, sure, the cosplay board is great, but when is there really been a really popular steampunk series?" And there was a big discussion going on over my shoulder while I was walking around the convention floor. And plus, I wanted to write something that I could finally cosplay somebody from if I wanted to. Because, you know, I like to get my nerd on. And there's not really anybody in the Dresden Files I can do terribly well. So. No, I couldn't do Butters. I'm not skinny enough for Butters. I'm not scrawny enough for Butters. But anyway, so that was part of the reason for it. And then plus steampunk cosplay is really cool. You know, I've just kind of enjoying all these outfits, everything that's happening. It's like, ooh, I'm gonna have to start building this stuff in the world, and that would be a lot of fun. And so basically, I was just having my nerdy fun at home, and then I thought, well, maybe this should be a book. And I said to the beta readers were like, "This is excellent." So I'm like, "It is." Okay, then let's try this.
You recently said in an interview that titanium math became like a fish with a bicycle. Harry's constantly surrounded by women like Molly and Murphy and Charity. What inspires the particularly powerful women of the Dresden Files series?
Oh, probably Princess Leia. You know, I mean, she was kind of the first action heroine that I remember seeing. You know, the first thing she does is stand up and blast somebody and smuggle some plans to the most dangerous installation in the galaxy off of ship, right under Darth Vader's nose. So you know, she's kind of cool. And then from there it was, you know, it's like I just don't see the point of writing characters who weren't interesting and engaged and involved in what's going on in the story, and that's how it goes.
So, what was the idea behind making Harry as a counterpoint to that sort of a bit of a chauvinist?
Oh, because the whole point of making Harry a bit of a chauvinist was to just get him kicked in the shins over and over. I mean, he's not so much a chauvinist as he's kind of on the noble end of it. He thinks he's doing good, and which is all right because I'm pretty much on the noble end of it myself. I think I'm doing good, but again, he gets kicked in the shins over and over for it. I mean, there's just if there's any way to make him, you know, to make him hesitate to pull the trigger or to throw the punch or whatever it is, it's like the girl can smile at him and stab it, and it's going to work every time.
Well, before we get to the audience questions, I'd like to ask one or two more, but I think we can have people start lining up in the middle here if anybody has any questions. questions that they'd like to ask Jim Butcher. See the gentleman there with the microphone, he will be fielding questions. You began by talking about having a song stuck in your head, and I've noticed that music is very important to the Dresden Files. You have Wagnerian opera at climaxes, you have Queen at climaxes. What brings the music into the Dresden Files for you?
I've watched too many movies. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, there's cool music playing when important things happen, and occasionally I like that to happen, be reflected in the Dresden Files as well. It's just a lot of fun, and I think it adds. The whole point of when you're writing a novel is the great part about writing a novel is you only have to do half the work of telling the story. I do my half of the work, and then you're doing your half of the work because you're making the story in your brain. And if I can give you a bit of a soundtrack to go with the story in your brain, so much the better. I mean, that's gonna help as well. I mean, if you just watch the lightsaber fights in episode 1 without playing Duel of the Fates in the background, it's like, it's all right. But once you add the cool music to it, it's like, ooh, okay, that's significant now. Music changes everything.
And staying with the theme of music for just a moment, Chicago, setting the Dresden Files, is well known as sort of the home and birthplace of electric blue. When it came time to combine music and magic, we chose polka. What was behind that?
I listen to a lot of Weird Al. His pop culture polka songs really, I just love them to death because it'll take all kinds of songs and blend them into a medley, a polka-ized medley of various things. Angry White Boy Polka is just one of those. Yeah. And the great thing about it is it actually takes a whole lot more skill to play those songs polka than it does to play them band. You just kind of got to be a little bit shocked by that. It's like, wow, he had to work really, really hard to make this happen. It takes a whole lot of skill. Why isn't he doing chart-topping songs? Because he's busy doing polka. Okay, I got it. He's doing stuff that's more fun. So, so polka. When it came to Butters, it didn't be polka. Butters is really, if you want to cast somebody for it, we'll cast like about 1989 era Weird Al Yankovic. You know, maybe a little bit earlier, maybe about 1984 when he's still doing the Eat It.
And is that why you're growing your hair back out?
Why I'm growing my hair back out? I told everybody it was going to grow back out. Nobody listened to me, jeez.
Well, let's take it over to the audience.
Good morning.
Good morning, Jim. Hey, right before I ask my question, can we get a poke will never die? Ready? 1, 2, 3. Hey, Jim. I'm Cassandra, and I actually want you to tell the story about the pets for Codex Solera.
Oh, the Codex Solera? Okay.
Fabulous story.
We'll set the Wayback Machine for 1998, 1999, somewhere right in there. And the Del Rey Online Writers Workshop has just started. And so it's a bunch of us that haven't been published yet, and we're involved in this online writers workshop. And we're talking about everything to do with writing. And so as you can imagine, it's the internet, so basically it's a bunch of loudmouths on the internet. Which I'm still a loudmouth on the internet, mind you. I just have some books published now. But at the time, it was just a bunch of us nobodies who were aspiring writers, and so we're furiously arguing all these different things and sharing bits of our writing and critiquing one another and slashing each other to bits and sort of all thinking to ourselves, these are the people I have to meet. And so the discussions got pretty animated, which is to say, you hit the reply button and then the caps lock and then you start typing. But a particular discussion had come up, and there were two sides of the argument, and the argument was writer's originality versus the holy idea, and with capital H, capital I, the holy idea. If you came up with a good enough idea that no matter how terrible you wrote it, if the idea was good enough, the book would be a success, and that's what you should look for, is the great idea. And they said, as their example, they said, look at Jurassic Park. Clone dinosaurs, that could not have missed. That idea could not miss, no matter how terribly it was written, and it was. And then there was another side of the argument that said, listen, the important thing about writing a story is not that you come up with an awesome original idea that nobody's ever done before, but that you put your own spin and originality onto the idea. And that side was, how many versions of Romeo and Juliet have we seen? And you can still see good versions of them still being done. So, and I was kind of leading that side, and so there was a flame war going back and forth, and finally the guy that was the loudest mouth on the other side looks at me and says, why don't you put your money where your mouth is? Why don't you let me give you a terrible idea and let me see you write it into something worthwhile? And being, a loudmouth on the internet at the time, I wrote it back and I said, no, I tell you what, why don't you give me 2 terrible ideas and I'll use them both? The guy says, fine, and he says, first terrible idea that I want you to use is Lost Roman Legion. I am so sick of Lost Roman Legion stories, all the Lost Roman Legion should have been found by now. So that's my first terrible idea, is Lost Roman Legion. I'm like, fine. I say, what's your next terrible idea? And he says, Pokemon. I am sick of Pokemon. And I said, all right, fine. So I went and I did some research. And I researched Roman legions, and the Lost Roman Legion that everybody usually refers to as the Ninth Hibernian Legion marched off north of the wall and never came back in England. And so I said, okay, we're going to take the Ninth Hibernian Legion, we're going to assume that they marched off somewhere, and where did they go to? Land of the Pokemon. And I said, and I went and looked up Pokemon. Now, Pokemon itself is a fusion of 2 ideas. The first being a literalization of the Shinto religion, and the Shinto belief that there is a divine kami or divine spirit inside all natural things, and that a tree or a river or a mountain all have a divine spirit in them, and you better respect them. And that if even a pebble has a divine spirit in it, and you better respect that. But if you don't, what's it going to do? It's a pebble. And then they took that idea and they used it with professional wrestling, and that's where Pokemon came from. So I said, okay, we're going to have my Lost Roman Legion. And I looked at the Roman legions at the time, which were about half Roman legionnaires, or about half Roman citizens, about half German mercenaries, and at the kind of camp followers that surrounded the legion. And really, if you want a colonization force, you can't be much better than the Roman legion with its camp followers. They were completely autonomous. They were very used to doing what they did. They were very professional. They could show up somewhere, plant crops, and just settle in. And I said, okay, we'll have to go off to the land of the Pokemon, and I'm going to give them a few thousand years, and they're going to develop into this kind of bifurcated society that's centered around these big Roman metropolitan style centers. But then out in the country, it'll be all Germanic freeholds out there in the countryside. And I gave them a while to build up their culture, and said, okay, and now we're going to start the story with a boy on a farm, because that's where fantasy starts, and I didn't make the rule. That's where Larry came from. And I finally went back to this guy and said, okay, you know what? And I went back a few months later and said, I think we've got a pretty good idea here. And at the time, we still didn't quite know how the internet was going to work with publishing rules. So I said, I don't want to publish it here because I don't want to risk that, losing my publishing rights. Because I think I can write this up into a novel and actually get it sold. And the guy writes me back and says, oh, so in other words, I'm right. And I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever, man, you're right. So he was right, and I got a 6-month deal.
Okay, so when it comes out, is Dresden going to see episode 7?
When it comes out, is Dresden going to see episode 7 at the drive-in in Aurora? And if necessary, he will call in a warden squad for security so that he can see this movie. Well, I mean, except they're all going to want to watch it too, because all the wardens that he deals with will be like you, Ramirez and Myers, like that. So.
How does Harry watch TV?
How does Harry watch TV? There is an electronics store across from a park that I found on Google Earth, and the electronics store, you can actually see in the Google Earth picture that when they have a big screen TV in the window, and it's got closed captioning on, and there's a bench across the street, and you can sit on the bench across the street with the closed captioning. Thank you, Google Earth, for supporting my madness. does.
And there, I have a question about the nature of the Fae. You have Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, the three traditional Greek faiths. The mothers have already copped to having held those names. The three traditional positions are the one who spins the thread, the one who measures it, and the one who cuts it. At this point, summer is a pretty good fit for the one who spins the thread, and winter is a pretty good fit for the one that cuts it. Who measures the thread?
You're measuring on the wrong axis. You need to turn it about 90 degrees. That's my answer to that. You'll notice there's 3 queens in each court. Anyway.
Interesting.
There you go. Hi.
So my question would be about Karen Murphy, because she is my favorite. So because she's completely vanilla, and she kicks the most butt of anyone, because she's vanilla. So I read a few clips, and of course I thought it was and then I made the mistake of watching the show. How do you personally feel about how the show took Murphy? In the show, she is a kid, dude. I mean, how do you feel about the physical changes? It's a show, it's an actress, so what? How do you feel about how they changed it in regard to her base character?
My opinion is a little skewed because Valerie, the actress who played Murphy, was the only one on the set who actually read the books. And came up to me and was like geeking out about the series and stuff like that. And there's buried geek in her background somewhere. But she was nerdy enough to qualify. That's something I would like to do in the game. So, other than that. Okay, I gotta be honest, I've only watched most of the show once. That was all I did. But the changes that got made were changes that got made kind of along the way, kind of the last. A lot of them got foisted onto the show at the last minute. I don't know if you guys knew this, but originally the show was scheduled to do, the first season was going to be a serial, and it was going to take the plots of Stormfront and Full Moon and interweave them along the way. Kind of have the climaxes of both happen at the same time in the season, which I thought was kind of cool. But then like 2 weeks before, they got a call and said, hey, we're putting a new producer on it. It's this guy here who's really awesome. He just got done doing Charmed. And he's going to be in charge. And the first thing he did was say, yeah, people don't like serials, so we're not going to do a serial. We're just going to make it episodes. And they're like, man, we've only got like 2 weeks. There's not time to rewrite everything. And he's like, yeah. Just change all the names and disconnect all the stories. That'll do. So I mean, they were sort of dealing with a lot on the set, and as far as the folks who were actually on the ground and who actually had to make the show, I really think they made the very best show they could, given all the restraints and complete crap they were handed that they had to work with, stuff like that. No, we're not going to do a serial. It's not going to be a lot. We're just going to and all these actors who've been scheduled to show up during several episodes. Nah, never mind that. We'll just get different actors and actresses to play these characters along the way. It's like, it was so close. It could have been cool until that last second thing. But it could have been worse. I also saw the first treatment of the show. It could have been a lot worse.
Absolutely. Just one little bit on top of that. Since you have gained so much more fame since then, do you think there's any chance of a reboot and being done properly?
Yeah, I think there's a chance. But if something was going to happen, I wouldn't be able to talk to anybody about it. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Although this time, I was able to say, well, if you want to do the show, you will need to have me along. And, it seems to have worked out for George. I think it's working out for Pat. So, hopefully, if it works out again, it'll work out again for me. In my copious spare time, I'll do TV show stuff.
Hello. How did Mav come to owe Endurial a favor?
How did Mav come to owe Endurial a favor? Mav has got a lot of things to get done. And you really, in the books, you only get to see bits and pieces of her job. But she has kind of an important job, which is why you never really see because when Mav is there, there's nobody doing Mav's job, and it's Leah's job to cover that. And when Leah's there, and, when Leah shows up, Mav is busy because Mav is doing things that she can't be bothered with, some chunk wizard in Chicago with. So she'll send Mulianchi to handle it instead. So the situation as it exists now did not always exist that way. The Fairy weren't always the ones who were, the Winter Fae were not always the ones who were defending the wall. And the transition, when they switched over, was a rough one. And so Mav had to ask a lot of favors at that point. And she's got people she's still paying off. And Duriel was one of them. Hello.
When you wrote the live journals for aspiring authors, it was great several years ago, and I know you don't have free time, but if you could make free time, have you ever thought about writing a book on writing?
Have I ever thought about writing a book on writing? I've thought about it, like I've titled it. I have never actually thought about writing it, but the book was, how to slay dragons, catch unicorns, break into publishing, and other impossible things. But then it would just be about breaking into publishing, basically. Because the dragon and unicorn thing, I don't know, I'm not good with that. But yeah, I've considered it. It's not something I'm really, all fired up about, because mostly writing stories is something I'm still learning about very quickly, and my learning curve is still pretty high, and so I'm sort of waiting until I think I know something about writing stories before I start telling people how to do it. Mostly all the stuff that I put on my blog is just regurgitated Swain and Bickham. If you want to go read the books by Jack Bickham and White Swain. Granted, I use examples like Star Wars rather than, I think they're trying to be more academic, so, they're using, Homer and Ulysses and stuff like that as their examples, which aren't as much fun as Star Wars. But I'm not teaching anything new about the craft of writing. When I teach a writing class, I'm not telling anybody anything. This is all stuff you can find out. I did my learning at the University of Oklahoma School of Professional Writing. Debbie Chester was my teacher. I think she's still a professor there. And it's just, a lot of writing, 90% of the business is just learning the craft. It's not anything mystic that you have to have a super cool talent for. You just have to figure out, this is how storytelling works, and here's the various pieces and how they're put together, and then you can learn how to do it. It's a matter of practice for the most part, and after that, then it becomes a matter of how much innate talent you have, which I did not have much in the way of innate talent. I can prove it to you. I can show you the first 8 books I wrote, except I'm not that mean. They were awful. But eventually I started listening to Debbie, and I started learning, this is how you put together a character, this is how you introduce a character. Here's how you write an action scene. Here's how you write a scene where you start revealing the character's feelings and intentions, and here's how you keep the story focused and moving towards a good direction. It's not easy by any means, but it's simple. I compare it to lifting an engine block out of a car. That's simple. It's not easy, and that's mostly what storytelling is. It's pretty simple. You just have to practice it until you get it down. Hello.
So I've always imagined that playing like D&D with you or George or Martin or like Tolkien or something would be, pretty cool.
D&D with Martin, oh my god.
I'm not saying D-handed, right? Just everybody dies. Yeah. Okay, so
George runs a Warhammer campaign. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
yeah, so my question was, I know you do some role-playing games. My question was,